Everyone in town thought she had the perfect marriage, until one secret with the driver destroyed everything. When the truth came out, no one expected what happened next. In the prestigious neighborhood of Victoria Garden Estate, where wealth dripped from every corner and gossip flowed like palm wine, Adaobi lived what many called the perfect life. She had a handsome husband, Chinedu, a wealthy businessman known for his calm demeanor and generosity. Their mansion stood tall among the rest, guarded by high fences and sparkling security lights that lit up the street like Christmas. Despite all the riches, Adaobi felt a strange emptiness, a hunger that no luxury handbag or diamond necklace could fill. Chinedu traveled frequently for business, sometimes gone for weeks at a time, leaving Adaobi alone in the massive house. Their marriage, once filled with laughter and affection, now felt like a business transaction. She convinced herself that she could handle the distance and loneliness. But the silence in that house was loud. One rainy morning, Chinedu hired a new driver named Emmanuel, a man in his early 30s with humble eyes and a quiet charm. Emmanuel was from a small village and had moved to the city to support his sick mother. Though modest in appearance, he carried himself with an unexpected confidence that intrigued Adaobi. He opened car doors with grace and spoke respectfully, always avoiding unnecessary eye contact. Adaobi noticed his strong build and the gentleness in his voice, something Chinedu had long stopped showing. At first, she ignored the little spark of interest she felt, but that spark grew every time she saw him. Sometimes, temptation begins not with desire, but with attention. Emmanuel quickly became trusted in the household. The staff admired him because he was hard-working and never complained. Adaobi began leaving unnecessary errands for him just to observe him more. She offered him food, sometimes engaging him in small talk, and he was always polite and distant. Emmanuel knew his place, but Adaobi was used to getting what she wanted. The distance and silence from her husband made her feel invisible. She craved validation, attention, anything that reminded her she was still a woman. And temptation doesn't scream, it whispers. One late afternoon, Adaobi asked Emmanuel to drive her to a boutique. As he drove, she studied him through the rearview mirror, noticing the firmness of his jawline and the quiet gentleness in his eyes. She leaned forward and asked, "Do you have a girlfriend?" Emmanuel stiffened, gripping the steering wheel harder. "Madame, my job is to drive you safely," he replied respectfully. The seriousness in his tone startled her. No man had spoken to her with such boundaries in a long time. Adaobi sat back quietly, but her curiosity deepened. When they arrived home, Chinedu was on another business call and barely acknowledged Adaobi. He waved at her dismissively and signaled her to leave the living room. Her heart burned with resentment as she walked away. The loneliness of wealth is a silent killer. She sat in her luxurious bedroom, surrounded by expensive things but feeling emotionally bankrupt. Emmanuel's warmth was the only human connection she felt all week. And so the seed of temptation grew. The following days became a dangerous game of subtle glances and accidental touches. Whenever Emmanuel opened the door for her, his hand brushed hers just slightly. Adaobi felt butterflies, the kind she hadn't felt in years. Emmanuel tried his best to stay professional, but Adaobi's presence unsettled him. She brought him coffee one morning, something no madam had ever done. Emmanuel stared at the cup, confused and nervous. "Madam, I don't think—" She cut him off with a smile. "It's just coffee. Relax." Adaobi started dressing differently whenever she knew Emmanuel was around. Instead of her regular long dresses and expensive gowns, She wore fitted clothes that revealed just enough to capture attention. The maids noticed the shift, but dared not say a word. The security guard whispered rumors to the cook, who rolled her eyes and pretended not to care. Emmanuel tried to avoid her, taking longer routes to the car and keeping conversations short. But Adaobi knew how to chase what she wanted. She made herself unavoidable. One evening, Chinedu called home to inform Adaobi he would be away for 2 more weeks. The disappointment crushed her completely. She felt abandoned, unseen, unloved. When she hung up, her chest tightened with a mix of anger and loneliness. She walked outside to the garden where Emmanuel was cleaning the car. Tears gathered in her eyes as she whispered, "Do you know what it feels like to be married and still feel alone?" Emmanuel froze, unsure how to respond. She broke down in tears, and that was the moment everything changed. Emmanuel rushed to comfort her, placing his hand gently on her shoulder. The touch sent a shock through both of them. She leaned into him, sobbing harder, her head resting against his chest. He held her cautiously at first, then tighter when she trembled. Adaobi wasn't acting. She truly felt abandoned. Emmanuel wasn't thinking. He was reacting out of compassion. That night, boundaries blurred dangerously. The next days became filled with subtle temptation and growing emotional attachment. Emmanuel found himself thinking about Adaobi when he shouldn't. He admired her beauty and elegance, something he had never been close to before. Adaobi, on the other hand, became bolder. She asked unnecessary errands, ordered late-night drives, and even sat in the front seat with him. Their conversations deepened, moving from casual topics to personal confessions. The emotional bond was forming, and emotional affairs are more dangerous than physical ones. Rumors began within the staff. The housemaid, Kioma, overheard laughter coming from the car one night. She saw shadows that looked too close, too familiar. Instead of minding her work, she told the cook what she saw. The cook rolled her eyes but couldn't ignore the discomfort creeping in. Whispers floated around the household like wildfire. Gossip is the fastest traveler, faster than shame, faster than truth. One afternoon, Adaobi asked Emmanuel to drive her to a quiet spot near a lakeside. They stayed in the park without talking, enjoying the silence. The cool breeze brushed her hair against his arm, making his heart race. She looked at him with vulnerable eyes and said the words she shouldn't have. "You make me feel alive again." Emmanuel swallowed hard, torn between desire and principles. He knew what could happen if he let his guard down. But sometimes forbidden fruit blinds the mind. That evening, after they returned to the mansion, Emmanuel tried to resign. "Madam, please, I can't continue this job. It's dangerous for both of us." Adaobi panicked and grabbed his arm. "If you leave, I will fall apart." Her voice cracked in desperation. Emmanuel looked at her, seeing honesty and loneliness in her eyes. Against his better judgment, he stayed. Chinedu had no idea what was happening in his absence. He trusted Emmanuel completely, often praising him to his colleagues. Adaobi pretended everything was normal whenever Chinedu called, but something in her voice sounded different, almost excited. Chinedu assumed she was just happy about a new shopping spree. Men sometimes miss what's right under their nose. A week later, Adaobi invited Emmanuel into the house instead of sending him to the servants' quarters. She asked him to help move a heavy flower vase into the living room. As he lifted it, Adaobi stepped too close, close enough to feel his breath. Their eyes locked, and tension filled the air. She whispered, "Do you think I am beautiful?" Emmanuel stepped back, trembling. "Madam, please," he whispered. The maid saw them, froze, then rushed silently out of sight. Her heart raced with excitement. She had never witnessed such a scandal. She couldn't wait to tell the cook what she saw. Rumors now turned into confirmation. The staff started treating Adaobi with cautious politeness, afraid of being dragged into whatever storm was coming. Adaobi grew fearless. She called Emmanuel late at night to bring her water or help fix curtains that didn't need fixing. Emmanuel was trapped between his growing feelings and his conscience. He tried praying, tried ignoring her, even tried avoiding eye contact. But Adaobi was relentless. Temptation doesn't always knock. Sometimes it barges in. One evening it happened. The room fell silent as Aisha's confession echoed through the house, her voice shaking as she admitted the affair with the driver. Karim stood frozen, his world collapsing in slow motion, realizing that the woman he defended against everyone was the one who pierced his heart. The driver, Musa, kept his eyes on the floor, ashamed yet unable to take back what had already been done. Neighbors pretended to mind their business, but the entire street buzzed with whispers and speculation. Karim's mother shook her head, murmuring that secrets don't rot in the ground, they always rise. Aisha tried to reach for Karim, but he gently pushed her hand away, unwilling to be touched by betrayal. The trust he had spent years building had been shattered in a single moment of weakness. He walked out of the house without his phone, his wallet, or even his slippers. Just pain. Days passed, and Karim refused to return home, sleeping at a friend's spare room while trying to quiet the storm in his mind. Aisha called endlessly, but he ignored every attempt because forgiveness was still buried under layers of humiliation. Musa disappeared from the community after the scandal broke, terrified of the consequences that might follow him. Karim began losing focus at work, making mistakes, missing deadlines, and eventually getting suspended. He never imagined betrayal could affect every corner of his life. Aisha's parents begged him to come for a family meeting, but he refused, insisting some wounds can't be bandaged. The neighbors continued talking, some blaming Aisha, others blaming Karim for being too trusting. Rumors eventually reached his workplace, and the embarrassment pushed him into silence and isolation. Aisha tried everything to fix what she had broken, calling counselors, seeking advice from elders, and even praying through sleepless nights. But Karim refused to meet her, convinced her remorse came too late. She waited outside his workplace one afternoon, tears streaming down her face as she held on to hope. Karim saw her and walked past like she was a stranger in a crowded market. That broke her more than anything else because she finally realized that apologies do not erase consequences. She stopped eating properly, her eyes swollen from crying every night. A once vibrant woman now felt invisible, losing herself to guilt and regret. Love does not always survive truth. Meanwhile, Karim lost his job completely, not because of the affair, but because heartbreak had drained every ounce of focus he once had. He felt like a failure, unable to keep his family or his career intact. Depression began to creep in quietly, like a thief at midnight. He stopped answering calls, stopped speaking to friends, and stopped believing that life could be repaired. Aisha heard about his job loss and tried reaching out again, begging him to talk. She offered to move out for a while so he could heal, but Karim refused, saying the house had become a graveyard of memories. He sold the house instead, using the money to disappear into another city. The man who once had everything now walked through life without purpose. Months passed, and the scandal died down, replaced by new gossip and fresh neighborhood drama. But Aisha and Karim lived permanently in the shadow of their mistakes and broken love. Aisha eventually signed the divorce papers alone, tears dripping onto her trembling hands. Karim never showed up at the court. His signature had already been sent through his lawyer. Aisha watched the envelope get sealed, knowing she had lost him forever. People say forgiveness heals wounds, but some wounds are too deep to close. Karim returned to his hometown, choosing loneliness over the risk of being hurt again. Aisha remained in her emptiness, punished by her own regrets. In the end, no one won. Aisha lost her marriage, her dignity, and her peace. Karim lost his home, his career, and his joy. Their hearts, once tied by love, now carried nothing but ashes of what could have been. The affair that was supposed to be a secret destroyed 2 lives completely. Aisha would later say, "One mistake cost me everything." Karim would whisper into the darkness, "Love is dangerous when given to the wrong person." And the town never forgot the tragedy of the woman who slept with her husband's driver. A year passed, and life changed in ways neither Aisha nor Karim could have predicted. Aisha moved into a small rented room far from the neighborhood that once celebrated her marriage. She avoided mirrors because each reflection reminded her of the woman she used to be, beautiful on the outside, rotten in her decisions. Shame became her closest companion, following her everywhere. She found a job as a cleaner in a small bakery, sweeping floors long before sunrise. People pointed and whispered, but gossip no longer hurt her. She had lived through worse. Her nights were filled with prayer, forgiveness, and unending tears. She held on to a tiny piece of faith that life might one day give her a second chance. Karim, in a new city, struggled to rebuild his life from the ground up. He worked as a mechanic's assistant, learning skills he had never imagined touching. His hands, once used to signing business contracts, now carried the grease of engines and hard labor. Yet a strange peace began to return, painful, slow, but steady. He realized that losing everything forced him to rediscover himself. The silence that once suffocated him now felt like freedom. He stopped looking back, stopped asking why, and started focusing on how to move forward. Sometimes heartbreak doesn't break a man, it rebuilds him. Aisha's turning point came one rainy evening when a young girl at the bakery asked why she always looked sad. The innocence in the child's eyes shattered the heaviness in her heart. Aisha smiled genuinely for the first time after months, realizing she still had a life to live. She enrolled in evening classes for catering, using every little coin she saved. She worked hard, determined to transform her pain into purpose. Slowly, she became known in the community, not as a disgraced wife, but as the woman whose pastries tasted like hope. Redemption doesn't erase the past, but it shows the world you are more than your mistakes. One afternoon, Aisha received a message from an unknown number. It was Karim's. He didn't send insults or bitterness, only 4 words. "I hope you're healing." The message made her knees buckle and she cried for hours, not from pain, but from relief. She responded with honesty, admitting she was still healing and deeply sorry. Karim read the message in silence, feeling a strange sense of closure wash over him. For the first time, he forgave her, not for her sake, but for his own peace. Forgiveness released him from the chains of the past. Months later, Karim opened a small motorcycle repair workshop with the help of a man who admired his work ethic. Business grew slowly, but he remained grateful for every customer. He discovered joy in the simplicity of honest work, something he had never appreciated before. People in the new community respected him, unaware of the pain that shaped his strength. Though he sometimes wondered about Aisha, he no longer felt anger, only acceptance. The chapter had closed, but it no longer haunted him. He had finally rebuilt what was once broken. himself. Aisha became a well-known baker, and her pastries soon gained attention on social media. A local cafe offered to feature her desserts in their shop, and it became an instant success. Customers loved her unique recipes, not knowing they were mixed with tears, healing, and late-night prayers. She discovered that mistakes do not define destiny. One evening, she sat outside the bakery, watching people enjoy her food, and felt something she thought she'd lost forever: peace. She whispered into the night, "Thank you for another chance." Healing had finally reached her heart. Years later, Aisha and Kareem met again unexpectedly at a charity event. The moment their eyes met, the world paused. There was no resentment, no anger, only calm familiarity. Kareem congratulated her on her success, and Aisha thanked him for forgiving her. They spoke like two old friends who once shared a life but had grown into separate stories. They both knew that love had once existed, but fate had chosen different paths. Kareem walked away with a smile, grateful that the past no longer held power over him. Aisha watched him leave, thankful that she had learned to love herself again. In the end, they didn't return to each other, and that was okay. Their journey was not one of reconciliation, but one of growth, learning, and redemption. Kareem found peace. Aisha found purpose. Sometimes the happy ending is not ending up together, but ending up healed. Pain broke them, forgiveness rebuilt them, and time set them free. And life moved on, beautifully, quietly, and finally, without regret.